veneration and celebration of St. George around the world. According to tradition, the village of Ortaki in the region of Potamia, Dereki, near the present-day village of Gzalki in Turkey, is considered the birthplace of St. George. There are ruins of an ancient temple dedicated to the great martyr at this site. It is believed that there were monastic buildings around the temple, and that it was built on the site of his birthplace. St. George is venerated not only among the Orthodox, but also among other Christian denominations and even among Muslims, among whom the feast is known as Hidrles. The day of his commemoration is a national holiday, or at least a day off in many countries. He is considered the patron saint of England, Bulgaria, Russia, Georgia, Greece, Ethiopia, Canada, Catalonia, Lithuania, Portugal, Serbia, Montenegro, and the cities of Beirut, Genoa, Istanbul, Ljubljana, Moscow, and Freiburg. In the Czech Republic, he is celebrated on the 24th April. Since the 23rd is the feast day of Saint Adalbert of Prague, countless churches and monasteries around the world are dedicated to him, but he called only the Zograf monastery on Mount Athos his home. The country of Georgia also bears his name. In Georgia, the feast of Saint George, Georgoba, was introduced by Saint Nino, who is considered a relative of the great martyr on her father's side. Saint George is the patron saint of the military, and on his feast day Orthodox Christians consecrate military banners. Emperor John Cantacuzene, 14th century, attests that during his time there were several Muslim shrines dedicated to Saint George. The traveler Din Stanley attests to the same 5 centuries later. Today in the Holy Land there are about 22 places of worship associated with the name and person of Saint George. Of these, 5 are sites of veneration by both Christians and Muslims, while 9 are associated solely with Muslim veneration. In Russia, there are numerous military orders named after Saint George, ranging from the 1st to the 4th class. His image as a horseman on a white horse has appeared since ancient times, even on the coats of arms of Russia and Georgia, and even on coins in Russia, as well as in Bulgaria and Italy. A sisterhood of charity in St. Petersburg was also dedicated to him. There are also folk sayings in Russia bearing his name today. Drive the herd out to the field and call out to Jaeger. Don't boast of your crops on St. George's Day, but boast of your grass on St. Nicholas Day, and others. Hospitals and hotels are also named after him. Among all the peoples of Europe and even Asia, St. George is venerated as the patron saint of livestock breeders, and in some places of farmers as well. For livestock breeders, based on the miracles of the resurrection of the ox and the slaying of the serpent, and for farmers, based on the meaning of his name in Greek, Georgs equals farmer. He is also venerated as the patron saint of shepherds, since on his feast day for the first time that year domestic animals are taken out to graze. On the day of his commemoration various peoples observe different customs and traditions. In Bulgaria, on the evening before St. George's Day, the preparation of the ritual breads begins. The dough is kneaded in clean troughs with silent water. The young woman or the woman who kneads the dough is dressed in festive attire and adorned with a green wreath. While kneading, they scrape the bowls with a silver coin or bracelet and cover the finished dough with a woman's blouse so that female lambs may be born, leaving a wreath on top. The symbolism in the decorations on St. George's Day loaves indicates that they are dedicated to the main livelihoods of Bulgarians at that time, agriculture and livestock farming. Early on the morning of the holiday, the entire house, as well as the household icon or candlestick, the sheepfold and other farm buildings are decorated with greenery, geranium, boxwood, and others. It is believed that as the guardian of the fields, St. George rides his colt and walks around the crops early in the morning blessing them. That is why farmers who own fields go to them on the festive morning and ritually walk around them, after which they bury in the middle the first red egg, specially saved from Easter. On St. George's Day it is customary to offer a sacrifice, a lamb in honor of the saint, which is known today as the St. George's lamb. According to tradition, the St. George's lamb must be the first male lamb born since the beginning of the year. In most cases a white coat is preferred and a black lamb is rarely slaughtered. The animal must not have any physical defects. It must not be lame, blind, or without ears. In Russia, the Winter Yuryev Day, November 26, is associated with the tradition of paying off debts since until the 17th century mercenaries had the opportunity to change employers on this day, but only if they owed nothing. In the tradition rich town of Budenheim and many other towns in Bavaria, the Georgeret, plural Georgeret, riding of George, takes place around St. George's Day on April 23. especially around churches dedicated to the saint. Colorfully decorated horses and carts parade several times around the church, where a service is then held to bless the riders and the horses. Various competitions may follow. In Portugal, traditions associated with St. George date back to the 12th century, and St. Constable attributed the Portuguese victory in the Battle of Aljubarrota in the 14th century against what is now mostly modern-day Spain to St. George. During the reign of King John I, St. George became the patron saint of Portugal, and the king ordered that an image of the saint on horseback be carried in the Corpus Christi procession. In fact, the motto of the Portuguese army means Portugal and St. George, in danger and in the efforts of war. In the Valencian city of Alcoy, St. George's Day is celebrated as a feast of thanksgiving for the supposed help the saint provided to the Christian troops fighting the Muslims during the siege of the city. Its citizens mark the day with a festival in which thousands of people parade in medieval costumes, forming to armies of Moors and Christians and reenacting the siege that gave the city to the Christians. In Cíceres, in the western region of Extremadura, the capital city of Cíceres celebrates the reconquest of the city from Muslim rule on April 23, 1229, by King Alfonso IX of Len, with commemorative celebrations that begin on the eve of the holiday, with a parade of Moors and Christians and various depictions of St. George and the dragon on horseback. In Turkey, near the Prince's Islands, there is a church dedicated to St. George on Kaduna Hill. The feast is celebrated by tens of thousands of Muslim pilgrims not only from Turkey, but also from other countries such as Iran and Iraq. Some of the pilgrims have a custom of climbing the hill to the shrine barefoot, others with a vow of silence, while others by a spool of thread tie one end to a bush at the foot of the hill, and stretch it all the way to the top as a symbol of their prayer addressed to St. George. And the bushes along the path are covered with notes containing wishes and prayers addressed to the saint. The faith of some of the pilgrims is enviable. One of them left a numbered list of 10 wishes, one of which is for a red Ferrari 354. St. George is highly honored and celebrated in ecclesiastical poetry and hymnography. We have preserved a eulogy in his honor by St. Andrew of Crete, 3 eulogies by Gregory Samblic, a eulogy by Arcadius of Cyprus for November 3th, the consecration of the Church of St. George in Leda. A large number of hymnographic works dedicated to St. George are also known. All prominent Byzantine hymnographers dedicated works to this saint: Roman the Melodist, Andrew of Crete, Cosmas of Mayum, John of Damascus, Theophanes the Confessor, Joseph the Hymnographer, a cycle of 8 canons in the order of the 8-tone system, Germanus of Constantinople, John of Euclida, Nicodemus, Anatolius the Studite, Philotheos Kokkinos, Ephraim of Caria, Gerasimos the monk, David of Attica, Niphon the monk, Anthony Caraphiles. In addition to the day of his martyrdom, St. George is also honored on the day of the restoration of his first church in Leda. On November 3th, the old print church Slavonic monologies include a service for the restoration of the church in Leda and the transfer of his holy relics, with a canon in the 4th tone. And on November 26th there is a service for the Church of St. George in Kiev. A specific feature in the hymnography for St. George is the canon intended for the occasion, when his feast day coincides with the resurrection of Christ, written by Patriarch Philotheos Kokkinos. An akathist and a supplicatory canon have also been written for St. George, and on Mount Athos the grandeur of the saint's festive service is enriched with additional verses of praise calling upon the saint. Rejoice! At the Bulgarian Zograf monastery, the main feast of St. George, on April 3th, is marked with a particularly festive all-night vigil lasting 14 hours, followed by a liturgical procession with one of his miraculous icons, during the carrying of which many have received the saint's prayerful help and intercession, for which they prayed to him while it was being carried. Undoubtedly, St. George is the most revered martyr saint in the entire world. A documentary film about him by the Georgian journalist David Georgobiani shows how people from various countries consider him their patron, and the saint, as a faithful friend of Christ, never ceases to help all who call upon him with warm, heartfelt faith throughout the world in every language, but above all in the language of love. Holy great martyr George, pray to God for us.